You're not really supposed to blow into these. Everyone yells at you when you do it, especially the retro community. They're not wrong. This is the Retron SQ from Hyperkin. I'm a really big fan of the ability of taking my older games and having a convenient, easy way of being able to play them on modern TVs with little to no fuss. And the promise of this is to be a dedicated console for playing Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and eventually Game Boy Advance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the idea is that you can just pop the card at the top, it plugs in using one of their USB-style controllers, and you just have HDMI out into your TV, and bam, you get a 720p clean-looking signal. And to an extent, this does deliver on that promise. But there's just a couple things that really hold it back from being what I so badly wanted it to be. So part of the way the system is being advertised is that it's allowing you to play original Game Boy Color, and then with fine print, Game Boy Advance. The fine print being that the Game Boy Advance functionality is actually in beta and not really working all that well yet. It's enabling some kind of frame skip that's just causing it to be super stuttery looking. You can especially tell with how the background moves as I'm moving. It just kind of constantly shakes along instead of being a smooth transition. And everything almost appears kind of slowed down. So, to begin with, I'm just playing a little bit of Pokemon Red, testing how it runs with an original Game Boy game. I also realized that the battery on my copy of Pokemon Red is loose and it deleted my save file, so I've always had a very big love and hate relationship with Hyperkin products. There are some that I think are great products, and there's a lot more, though, where I think the concept on paper is amazing, and then the execution, the final product, just isn't quite there. First off, the good. Like I mentioned, the main goal of it right now is being able to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, which it does very well. There's one particular little thing that's odd, and we'll talk about in a second, but as far as just the look of the signal and everything goes, it's a clean looking image. Gameplay looks good, colors look right. Overall, it is a pleasant experience to play these games. One aspect of it that is a little weird, though, is aspect ratio. As far as the built-in settings on the system go, it only supports playing games in 4:3 and 16:9, which, funny enough, neither of which are actually accurate to the Game Boy. The Game Boy actually uses an aspect ratio of 10:9, so even when you're using 4:3, it's actually a little stretched compared to how things would look on a proper Game Boy screen. It's not as bad as seeing like a 4:3 game stretched to 16:9, where it's really noticeable how everything gets just spread out, but it is definitely a little wider than it would normally be on the traditional screen. Whereas with Game Boy Advance, it's actually slightly squishing the image, taking it from 3:2 to 4:3, or if you want to blow up those numbers a little bit so they're a little easier to compare, 9:6 versus 8:6. And again, this is just going from either of those to 4:3. You do also have the option to do 16:9, which, no, you just really shouldn't, in my opinion. It will fill your television screen, but ultimately it is going to more heavily warp both of these images, heavily stretching them out, especially in the case of Game Boy games. It was really funny, when I first posted a picture of messing around with this system, a lot of people were freaking out about the fact that you could, play your Game Boy games on a big screen TV, but this isn't really the first option to offer something like that. Even the company that makes this, Hyperkin, already has another system option out, which is one of the more popular ones, the Retron 5, that supports Game Boy alongside a number of other systems like NES and SNES. This is just a cheaper option that specializes in Game Boy specifically. And then if you're looking at official options, there are stuff that existed back when you would use them with a CRT, like, say, the Super Game Boy, which lets you use Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo. Or even the GameCube had a GBA adapter. That's a little expensive to try and find a complete set of right now, so those aren't exactly economical choices nowadays, but there was that way of playing stuff on your TV before. Now, I'll be honest, going to 4:3 from either of these native aspect ratios doesn't actually bother me all that much. I know they're wrong, I know it is a slightly warped image, but it is a minute enough effect that it doesn't actually bother me all that much, and honestly, I don't even fully notice it right away with some games. And really, the shift happening here is not nearly as dramatic as some other stretching you might see in other situations. Like, if you've ever tried playing a 4:3 game in 16:9 and it stretches and fills, you'll notice how much it stretches out. This is a much less heavy amount of warping happening in this particular instance, but it's still there. It's enough that if you're a purist, it's going to bother you for sure, but honestly, I think for a lot of people out there, it's not that bad. And so for being able to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, I think this actually is a pretty nifty solution, and one that comes out at honestly still a fairly high price point, lower than a lot of alternatives out there. So I really love the potential solution this offers here of being a not as expensive choice as some other ones out there, and giving you a convenient, simple way of hooking up your old school Game Boy games to a TV. But there are some major problems you end up running into, particularly with GBA and with the sort of long-term use of the system. Now, first off, GBA. Now, to be fair, the box for this product clearly states that the Game Boy Advance feature is technically still in beta as of right now, and that is definitely a fact. If you boot up pretty much any Game Boy Advance game I have tried so far on this system, immediately shows problems, most notably in terms of frame skipping occurring, where it's this very stuttery, unpleasant-looking frame rate that just doesn't really translate the experience from how it would be playing on an actual Game Boy Advance. Yeah, same thing. It looks like there's some kind of frame skip issue going on right now where it's not leading to the kind of smoothness you would expect while playing on the actual handheld itself. Part of the reason why I wanted to play Golden Sun is not only because it's a great game, but it is one of the really beautiful looking games on a GBA that kind of pushes what the system can do looks-wise, and yeah. I think because it's like a turn-based game, it's not bothering me as much the way the frame rate's working out, but it's definitely not right. It's not as smooth as it should be, absolutely. The games will actually run, and it does work well enough to the extent that you could actually, say, play them from start to finish, but it's not really going to be a pleasant experience or one that lives up to the nostalgia of how you played the game in the past. And so, if you are at all interested in this product for GBA purposes, it's just not quite ready yet. Now, in defense as well, Hyperkin has clearly said that this is in beta, and there are multiple firmware updates planned for the system that eventually it should be able to support Game Boy Advance games just fine, which I think when that day comes, this system ends up looking a lot more enticing. But until then, you're cutting out an entire section of games that are technically capable of being played on the system, but just aren't going to work right now. And really, where this ends up being an even bigger problem, though, is how this system ends up handling playing these games. See, this is not natively running any of them like it's a proper Game Boy. There is no Game Boy hardware inside the Retron SQ. Instead, it's just running an emulator. What's basically happening is the first time you start up a game that's plugged into the system, it's dumping the ROM, including any save file you previously had, and allows you to play from that point on. But when it does that, it's only running through the emulator itself, which poses a few specific weird things that end up happening. First off, if there's any unique or interesting qualities in terms of how a games cart worked in the past, for instance, maybe having built-in gyro controls, those aren't going to work because it's not actually running off the cart, it's running off the system itself. What's an even bigger issue, though, is how saves are handled. See, again, any saves you had previously when you first put a game in the system ends up getting dumped along with the ROM, so you can continue your adventures that you were playing on a Game Boy cartridge. What happens after that, though, is it almost kind of acts like a timeline split, where everything you do on the Retron from then on is being saved exclusively to the Retron because it's saving to the microSD in the system, not to the game card itself. So basically, if you started playing a game on your Game Boy, moved it over to the Retron, you could keep playing that save file, but then after that initial time that you've done that, you have to keep playing on the Retron to move that save file further and further ahead, or keep playing on your Game Boy. It's not something you can dive back and forth in, because ultimately you're not saving anything to the game cart that's happening on the Retron, it's all going to that internal storage. Where this becomes an even larger headache that's really frustrating is that as of right now at least, if you ever do a firmware update for the Retron, it will wipe any saves currently intact on the system. So, for example, you buy the system, you've realized that the GBA stuff doesn't work yet, which is a little disappointing, but fine, you'll play Game Boy Color games, do that for a long period of time, and then hey, the GBA update finally launches, and in order to actually make use of it, you have to wipe all the progress you've done on the system since you bought it. Now, I will say there is a note on Hyperkin's own website for this that says that this is something that may change in the future. It sounds like they are trying to find a way around being able to do firmware updates that won't wipe the saves in process, but until that actually is something that is confirmed, that's a really annoying thing to find out. Now, to be clear, the big takeaway here for me isn't necessarily that the Retron is bad. I think there is a lot of potential in the system. What I do think it means, though, is that it was absolutely released just a bit too early. Basically, anyone who buys this right now is acting as a product tester, whether they intended to or not. And while I think there is an eventual version of the system that's going to be actually pretty worth picking up for its price point once it's able to run all these kind of games and you don't have to worry about doing a firmware update in the future that wipes all your data, ultimately that's not what's happening right now when you buy it. And even once those particular issues are addressed, there are other things to keep in mind if you are interested in grabbing this. Again, it is not displaying in the native aspect ratio of either of these systems. You're going to have to deal with the fact that images are going to look a little squished or a little stretched. Personally, again, I don't think it's enough to where it actually bothered me, and I think there's a lot of people who would probably be fine with the amount of warping that it's occurring. But if you are a purist about wanting to have an exact image like you would have on the handheld screen, this isn't going to do that unless that is a new feature they end up adding down the line. And also on top of that, even if they fix the issue of saves being wiped when you do firmware updates, ultimately you have to embrace the fact that any saving you do on the Retron is going to be rooted right then and there. Really, one of the things I was excited about the concept with this was something you could almost treat like a Game Boy Switch, where I could play games on my Game Boy Advance or my Game Boy Color, and then pop them in the Retron to play on TV screen for a little bit, and then be able to swap back afterwards if I want to, which is still an option for some games where save files don't necessarily matter, like, say, Tetris. But for anything else like Pokemon, you're not going to be able to do that. As it stands right now, I think this is an interesting product if you are exclusively interested in playing some of your Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on a big screen TV, and that is it. If you are at all interested in GBA, you should wait to see if they end up having any kind of firmware update that ends up fixing it. And honestly, if you're at least remotely interested in using that feature, you should wait anyways because of the fact that, again, any save progress you make is likely to get wiped once that update launches. Based on how the system itself works, the save file split is something that I think is just going to be a permanent aspect of the system no matter what. I do hope that maybe as part of a future firmware update, they could find a way to also address the aspect ratio where even if you're displaying it in 4:3 or 16:9, it knows how to actually properly cut off the bottoms or edges in order to fit that traditional aspect ratio of the games. That particular feature to me is not necessarily a make or break thing. Again, I find the warping to be minute enough that it doesn't really kill it for me, but that would absolutely be a major benefit if they got it to use that traditional ratio. Because again, this is the type of stuff that I always get really excited for. I love easy, out-of-the-box ways for people to be able to play their favorite old games on modern television screens, because not everyone's going to take the time to learn how to properly emulate or buy a extra expensive system that allows them to run their old games on an HD TV properly. This is, I think, a potentially really good middle balance point that is a lower, more affordable price point that offers that feature. It's just that full feature list isn't here yet. I don't think I could really hard recommend anyone pick this up right now in its current state, but I definitely want to keep an eye on the updates that happen for the system over time, and there is a version of it out there that exists sometime in the future that I think is really cool. It's just not here yet. So let's see if that was just an issue of the cart being unreadable. I should not have done that without turning off the game recording first. Oops, it's mad at me. I can see it's mad at me.